I think even more troubling is the idea that you can codify ethics. In other words, you used the example of taking cookies from a cookie jar. Well, if I'm a politician, Nick, and there's a code of conduct, okay, and somehow or other in the code of conduct that is supposed to be the skeleton, the guiding principles behind my ethical behavior, whether I'm in business or I'm an elected official, that if it's not included as one of the points, if my behavior is not prohibited, if you will, in that codification of ethics, can I be held accountable for unethical behavior for having behaved that way? And to use the example of the cookie jar, hand in the cookie jar, I'm sure that there is no code of ethics out there that explicitly prohibits a Fortune 500 CEO or a senior politician in a Democratic government from stealing cookies from children. Now, you and I both know that's wrong, but is it actually codified? Is it actually written explicitly in the ethics guidelines, if you will? And if it's not, then I could theoretically be cleared of having acted unethically, even though I actually have acted unethically. Because all of a sudden, ethics become not a question of character, but a question of what do the regulations say? And if the regulations don't say that it's wrong, then why should I be held accountable for doing it?
You see a lot of this on the federal level with our particular government saying, well, the ethics commissioner didn't have a problem with this, so therefore it's okay. No, wrong. You should know that taking candy from a baby or putting your hand in the cookie jar, especially when it's not your jar and it's not your cookies, is unethical behavior. And we shouldn't have to have somebody watching over you to make sure that you don't do it. Because as you point out, well, then what's stopping you if it's not spelled out? Like, I guess maybe what I'm trying to say is, how far do we carry this idea of what's itemized by the ethics commissioner as something that's ethical or something that's not? Because there's a million different things a person can do, and given the circumstances at the time, in one instance, helping a woman on with her jacket is completely ethical. But in other circumstances, especially if it's not someone you're married to, may be completely unethical based on what's going on at the time. So the same act in different circumstances is either ethical or not ethical, but it's a judgment call, and it's a demonstration of character. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you have a driving instructor, and the driving instructor is a male, and he has a female student, let's say a 20-year-old, or who cares how old, the age is irrelevant. And during the course of instruction, he reaches over to take the wheel and demonstrate to her how to go around a corner. But instead of gripping the wheel, he covers her hand with his. Now, in some cases, that won't be a problem, because there's certain cultures that don't mind that kind of physical contact. But in others, that would be a huge faux pas. You just don't touch another woman, other than your spouse. And it all boils down to the driving instructor saying, okay, to be safe on the ethical side, I'm just not going to touch women on the hand when I'm teaching them to drive, ever. And now you're safe, because now the circumstances don't matter. You're not engaged in the behavior in the first place. You don't need an ethics commissioner to stand over you and say, well, you should have figured. No, the whole point of becoming an adult is to be able to make these decisions on your own without having somebody watch over your shoulder. And as you pointed out earlier, your character and your sense of ethos should already be formed by the time you run for public office. And it's really frustrating when you see some guy being pulled through a knothole back and forth 3 or 4 times. And I don't. You're right. We're not going to get into the meat and potatoes of the story because we're trying to, keep it on a broader level so it applies across the country and across the Western world. That there's certain things. This whole idea of having an ethics commissioner in the first place tells us our ethics are weak at best. Otherwise, we wouldn't need one.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the point I've been making, and I think you and I see eye to eye.
I'm just backing it up. Yep.
I think you and I see eye to eye on that, and I suspect that most of our listeners will understand the logic and the position that we're taking. Look, it's like I always said to my kids when they were growing up, my grandchildren, now that they're getting old enough to really understand the concept, some of them anyway, and that is, you have to understand that just because something is legal, that is to say, it has not been deemed through the legislative process to be illegal. Just because something is not illegal doesn't mean that it's okay. And for too many things today, we judge our standard of deciding whether they're okay or not okay to do behavior-wise comes down to the question of whether they're legal or illegal. And these are two very different subjects altogether, very different concepts. Right and wrong is right and wrong. And that is, perhaps it's cultural, it's traditional, it's whatever it is, okay? Package that up, put it on the side. Legal, the line between legal and illegal is the line at which we say, this is so wrong in terms of behavior that we as a society have the right to take action to prevent you from acting this way, and if you do act this way, from punishing you if you act this way. So there are many things that are legal but wrong, just not wrong enough for us to say as a society, okay, that is so wrong here's the line, we draw the line, and now as a society we're prepared to step in. And, I could just sort of sense our libertarian friends out there, our libertarian listeners out there, cringing at what I'm saying. But the fact is that as I've done many presentations along this line, talking about the difference between right and wrong and legal and illegal. The fact is that all of our laws, to the degree that they posit a theory of right and wrong, all of our laws are moral laws. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
All laws are moral laws. So all of this talk about how you can't legislate morality is just, it's a smokescreen. It's a red herring. It's something that's thrown up there by, pseudo-liberal or pseudo-intellectuals and neoliberals and progressives, because they don't want to deal with the uncomfortable notion of right and wrong and innate right and wrong, and the idea that you bring people up in a sense of doing the right thing because it's the right thing and avoiding doing the wrong thing because it's the wrong thing, and just setting aside, the whole question of legal and illegal. But where you're right, you raised the example, Nick, of a government, and we've seen this with our own federal government here in Canada, where the government officials have done things that are absolutely clearly wrong and ought to be illegal or ought to be ethical violations, but because what they've done has been investigated by the ethics commissioner of our federal parliament here in Canada, and the ethics commissioner made a ruling that it wasn't an ethical violation, then they go, well, we haven't done anything wrong. But in fact, they have done something wrong, irrespective of how the ruling goes, because the ruling only applies to what is codified as ethical or unethical behavior. And if it's not codified as unethical behavior, then you're not going to be found guilty of violating the code of ethics. And to me, Nick, this is so fundamentally simple to understand that it again, sometimes I'm astonished by how our public figures seem not to get some of this basic, I won't say infantile, but you don't have to be a rocket scientist to be able to grasp the concept that I'm expressing here. And so...
Well, sometimes I think maybe rocket scientists are the only ones who got left that have got enough brains to figure this stuff out, because it's pretty clear. You know what? I'm going to scratch that whole line of thought because of this. I think that the ethics commissioner is acting as a hide, a place to hide for people who don't want to be held to any higher standard. Because the moment they say...
I think you're exactly right. I think you're hitting the nail on the head. I think they've put these people in place and the whole regimen in place because it's a way of them getting out of being accused of bad behavior and being held accountable for bad behavior and poor judgment. I think you're 100% right, Nick.
As much as I wish I wasn't, it's really easy for an elected official to say, well, I was cleared by the ethics official. What's your problem?
Yeah, I think you're...
and all of a sudden now, they think they're away to the races. And people should say, hold it, who cares? We don't care about the ethics commissioner because we think you behaved badly and we're going to punish you for it.
But the problem...
They don't do that, but they should.
But the problem, Nick, is that this has become so deeply entrenched in our collective psyche, if you will, that the public actually buys into the notion that if the ethics commissioner rules a certain way, then it's clearing. In other words, the government or whoever's been accused is getting a clean bill of health. In other words, they didn't do anything wrong. And again, to me, I just think ultimately we need to start electing public officials with a certain minimum amount of integrity and a certain strength of character. I think those are the first two questions you have to ask when you're looking at who you're going to vote for in an election. Policy is important, okay? Doctrine, if you will, is important. Ideology is important. But before you even get to those questions, the first question you have to ask is, does this person have the integrity that they deserve my vote? And that I can trust them to act with integrity once they're elected. And that's the first thing. And the second thing is, do they have the character to stand up for the principles that we are electing them to advance, irrespective of the pressure that's going to come, not just from opposition parties, but also from their own political establishment. And that's a topic that we're going to get into, I think, in a little bit more detail in the third segment of our show tonight, when we talk about what's going on in the province of Ontario politically as well, because there's a lot of stuff that we could chew on there, Nick.
Well, you're absolutely...
I'm just letting you know we're coming up to a break here in about 60 seconds, Nick, but go ahead.
I was just going to say that whole line of reasoning leads you to the conclusion that finding people like that is far more difficult today than it's ever have been before. But you're right, we've got to find them and we've got to encourage them to run, and then we have to stand behind them when they do run and face the fire.
Okay, we're coming up on the bottom of the hour, ladies and gentlemen, so as you know, that means that if you're listening to the live broadcast, we're going to go for a bit of a break, have a little bit of break music. If you're listening to the podcast, that means that we're coming to the end of our show for today, and hopefully you'll tune in tomorrow for segment number 2 on the Nick and Joe Show here on ThinkRadio.ca.